Hello again, and welcome to the webinar today on lessons learned from the Trendsetters and Decentralized Trials, talking about rapid deployment of mHealth integrations. My name is Christian Knaus, and I am your host for the webinar today. It is 2 minutes past the hour, so we're going to go ahead and start, even though people are still joining. I will go over a few housekeeping items first. And so we have a QA session or section at the end, and there is a QA section here in the Zoom section that you can type in your questions. All the attendees are muted on today's webinar, so please type in your questions. We will answer those at the end of the webinar if we have time. If we run out of time and do not have time to answer all of the questions, we will respond offline and answer those questions offline by email. Also, feel free to reach out to us if you want a copy of the slides of the deck from today or a link to the recording. Then please contact us. The information about that will be at the end of the webinar. We will be closing the webinar on time, so we will be closing the webinar at the full hour. And as I said, whatever questions we do not get to, we will respond to offline. Other than that, I think we're ready to get started. And so again, welcome to the webinar today. It's hosted by snapIoT, and I have fellow panelists from Covance and ActiGraph here today. And if we can go to the next slide, then we will talk a little bit about the objectives for today's webinar. So there's just a few things that we think that we can want to convey today. And one is to have a realistic expectations when identifying wearable devices. We all do a lot of decentralized trials today, and we want to do them, and we do have to collect data, and we have the means to collect data in a direct and device-driven way. And so we'll talk about how we manage those expectations. Also, there will be some lessons learned in what we here on the panel have experienced in rapid deployments for decentralized trials, as well as to evaluate what is required to have a successful integration of those wearables, of those devices, and to have a successful implementation of an integrated mHealth landscape. And ultimately, we'll have also a short demo. It will be a recorded demo, just to have a bit more of a time control over it. And so we'll show you a few things there towards the end of the webinar. So let me introduce you to our speakers here today. As I said, my name is Christian Knaus. I'm a Senior Director of Client Development here at snapIoT, and I'll be the host for today, and I'll also start off the webinar with a short section of my own. I'll have on the panel today as well Bola Oyegunwa, VP and Global Head of Hybrid and Virtual Trials at Covance, and the President and CEO of ActiGraph, Jeremy Wyatt. So we talked a little bit about what we're going to do, or what our objectives are for today. Here's another agenda slide, sort of to give you the rundown of how it's going to go. As I said, I'll start it off with a section about decentralized wearables and integrations and some of the lessons learned that we have. And then Bola will talk about how to reimagine your clinical trials for the virtual deployment. And Jeremy will talk about more on the data side of things from the experience at ActiGraph and planning for actigraphy data in your clinical trials specifically. And then before we jump into the demo of some integrated remote biometric data collection, and ultimately, of course, closing with the Q&A section. And again, there is a Q&A chat box, so that's separate from the Zoom chat. So please make sure to post your questions there. So again, I'll start it off here, decentralized trials, wearables, and integration. And so my subheading here is this a modern clinical trial love story? And we have all heard a lot about decentralized trials. We've talked about it for a long time. I've been in the industry for over 15 years now, working on technology and in the device sector. And eco and a lot of integration and decentralized virtual trials has been talked about. There's even an evolution in names for it. And in the environment we find ourselves in here in the recent months, I think this has gained a lot of traction and has certainly ramped up speed a little bit, gained momentum. And we talked about it in a previous webinar that those things, I think those technologies and decentralized trials are finally here, and I think they're here to stay. But what are the let's say the pitfalls, the lesson learned, and is this really the love story that we all had hoped for? Next slide. So as I said, there's some things to be considered. We have some lessons learned, and I'll jump right in here. Is as how do you find the wearables and the devices that you need, and then how do you incorporate them in your clinical trial from a high level, from a more of a administrative perspective. And that's I think what's incredibly important is to start planning your wearable use early on. And what I mean by that is to get really involved in not only in the protocol stage, but maybe even before then, that you have certain capabilities at your disposal to collect certain data points. But also then when you do have your protocol development, that you drive that endpoint expectation in an appropriate way, and that you have a schedule of assessments or a schedule of events that matches your endpoint targets and the devices that you have that you're planning to use. So and why that's important is, of course, we all have protocol concepts have been around for forever, and they don't change all that much, right, over time. But they're all centered around a traditional clinical trial approach. So when you go into a different environment and do this in a decentralized way, some things just don't work out as well. And right now in the situation where we have a lot of trials that are ongoing, and then all of a sudden we're trying to convert them in a sense to do some things remotely because we have to. We realize that some of the things just don't necessarily work that way, or that maybe you can space your schedule of events in a different way, that you do things that need to be done physically in person, that you bunch those together in visits where you have interim visits. Maybe that'll be fine to do without that stuff, and you can tailor that to your strategy and how you want to run your trial. And we've all had these situations now in the last few months to learn that this is important to do. And once the protocol is written and you have it submitted and approved, then it's hard to change this stuff, especially in a running trial. Also, then what's the next step is, once you've done that, is consider how the data will be collected and received and used. So what I mean by that is, are you continuously or sporadically collecting that data point? That might drive not only your schedule of events, but it also determines what devices you will need. So if you have a continuous data collection that you need, then a device such as ActiGraph's Insight Watch is probably better over another sensor because it can last a lot longer on a battery charge, and it can be worn on the wrist, where another sensor might have to be placed on and off on a daily basis, or needs to be recharged or downloaded or something like that. So make sure you have the right use case for the device that you're intending to use, or the right device for the use case you want. Similar then for the data exchange, if you're doing a continuous continuous use, you also want that data continuously into your backend. So you need to make sure that you have real-time, basically, aggregation of that data versus they download it at the visit, or they download it once a week. They take it down and put it in a docking station or something like that. And then the same goes for, on the back end, your data review, right? Do you want this integrated into a database and you have the means to pull reports and see trends at any time, versus just having traditional monthly files? And then, of course, do you want your data processed or raw data? These companies, a lot of the companies such as ActiGraph, have developed algorithms over time and have expertise in how to make sense of this raw data that they're collecting on the hardware level. And do you want that data to be processed and made sense of for you, or do you just want the raw data and you have the smarts to do it yourself? Next slide, please. So now we've got a plan now, and now what? I said, so there's some lessons learned here, and it ties in with what I said already. Identify your stakeholders, external and internal, of course, importantly, and identify them early and get them talking as soon as possible. Don't wait to get aligned and integrated. And by integrated, I mean on the administrative side as well as on the technology side, right? If you can do your homework ahead of time, it's always better that way. But what's really important is to get all the stakeholders involved, because we all have been there, that you have this great idea and you get going and you start talking, and then all of a sudden, you forgot to talk to, I don't know, you forgot to talk to QA, and then they said at some point they get wind of it, and then they say, hey, wait a second, we can't do that. We got a process to follow. We have an SOP. You can't do that, or things like that. And we just had that experience recently with the customer where things were all excited, and then QA got pulled in at the last minute and really threw us a curveball there. And it's just a lesson learned for everyone to make sure that all sides and all angles are considered. And just because we're in a hurry now, or we're changing the way we do things, doesn't mean there isn't a process to follow. And technology, of course, is fast these days. So make sure you get the process identified early on, so that doesn't actually at the end slow down what your technology can do. Next slide. So from our perspective here at snapIoT, then, what do you want to consider for building a portfolio of mHealth integrations? And so that's what we do here, is that we have a library, and the integrations go into that library as well, not just instruments and stuff. So once you do have those partners that are capable to do that, make sure you define some real world use cases that work out for what you really want to do. Don't just dream up some potential opportunities and the vision that all sounds great. It also needs to be applicable, right? And while it is great to have a vision, a 5-year plan or something like that, it also still needs to be workable now, so you can convince and get your stakeholders involved, and plan for reusability. And that's why I'm mentioning the library, because we have that library of over 20 applicable integrations. And the average time to integrate for us here is about 2 weeks. We've done some shorter, some take longer. It depends on how the technology plays along, and the integratable parties are able to do this. And so that's just something, a few things to keep in mind when you build your portfolio. Make sure that all the players are getting on the playground and play nice together. Next slide, please. So this is a bit of a preview of what we're talking about later on the demo, what we'll be showing you in the demo. We're not showing you the full scope of this, but this is an example for a decentralized trial that we built together, and it included 3 smart devices that were integrated, one of which was ActiGraph. We also had a patient app for eco and telemedicine, and some other things, notifications, reminders, etc., as well as a site portal and an app for, I said, quote, all the site things, the typical stuff, patient management, etc., but also including telemedicine with scheduling for that, and the integrated devices and the review and the management of those. And all of that took us 4 weeks to build. That is including, building those integrations. And we'll show you later a little bit how we build this or what this can look like, this fully integrated study in a quote snap. And so stay tuned for that. It's going to be a nice little demo. And even though it's a recording, I think you'll like it. So with that said, without further ado, that is me for now. You will hear back from me later, and I will hand it over to Bola.
Hi, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. Thank you for joining our webinar. Thanks, Christian. So Christian spoke eloquently to devices and other aspects of decentralized trials, such as digital health. What we're going to do at this point is take a few steps back and speak to you about decentralized trials and how to identify opportunities or protocols and when you may want to consider implementing this delivery modality. There are several drivers for virtual trials. Very briefly, extending patient reach, diversification of patient participation, enabling patients to participate in a more real-world setting by minimizing the disruption to their everyday schedule, accelerating timelines, accelerating patient recruitment and study completion, opportunity to optimize delivery, to optimize cost, and also to reimagine and streamline the clinical trial design. And of course, the most important is reimagining study design to put patients at the center of a clinical trial to reduce their burden of participation. Clinical trials is more than just devices and integration of devices and digital health. It really requires systematic and strategic linkage of all of the delivery elements across the delivery value chain. Data and technology providing a global patient support ecosystem that enables patients to participate remotely, regardless of their geography. And systematically combining all of these elements to maximize value in terms of patient convenience, accelerating intelligent business decisions, design optimization, and also being able to derive actionable patient signals in near real time. Decentralized trials is combining all of these enterprise level competencies and making sure that the technology and devices are not disjointed from the actual study execution, from operationalization. It is critical that these solutions are highly flexible and configurable to be able to support any type of study design. So for example, depending on the study design, home health nurses or mobile health nurses may be used in conjunction with connected devices. And we're going to be speaking subsequently to an example of connected devices, e-diaries to capture data from patients directly, and e-source to digitalize clinical data collection as well. A different study design may be used where it is site-based. However, certain elements of the study are decentralized, sending the drugs directly to the patients, or again, deployment of e-source to digitalize the clinical data collection. So hopefully you're connecting the dots that decentralized trials is really across the spectrum of clinical delivery. At one end, you have fully site-centric studies. At the other end, you have fully virtual studies, and everything all along that continuum, where certain aspects of the study can be decentralized, can be enabled remotely. And to really do that, the infrastructure is required to enable that digitalization and seamless data collection from patients if they're not participating at an investigator site. Next slide, please. In terms of designing a highly suitable protocol, there are several things that needs to occur to move from a study concept or protocol to an optimized trial design for the centralized trials. Things to consider are: what are the study objectives? What are the risks and rewards? What are the study considerations? And what are the study menu or the offerings to select to deploy on that study? And the strategic and systematic combination of all of those elements into a highly patient-centric design that is fully integrated into the operations and delivery engine, so it's not disjointed, and also keeping in mind the regulatory strategy by country, overall delivery strategy, strategies to accelerate recruitment, technology and integration strategy, and also an appropriate medical oversight approach. So as you can see, there is really a lot that goes into designing a study that is highly suitable for the centralized trials and picking the appropriate devices or solutions that will be deployed as part of that study. Now, on the previous slide, we mentioned the study considerations, and we're going to speak very briefly to a few of those. The phase of the study should be taken into consideration. Some study phases are more suitable than others. First-in-human studies where the safety profile of the drug has not been completely defined may not be suitable. It doesn't mean that some elements cannot be virtualized. However, we recommend proceeding with caution. The therapeutic areas as well should be evaluated. The endpoints, the primary and secondary endpoints that have been collected, are the opportunities for exploratory endpoints and digital biomarkers. The compound formulation and safety profile, has the drug been tested previously in other populations? Has it been approved previously in a different indication? What does the safety profile look like? What is the route of administration? Is it IV? Is it an infusion? Can it be done at the patient home? The study locations: US, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, APAC, Latin America, Middle East. Are there existing infrastructure that can support successful deployment of these delivery modalities? And finally, the subject population. Are they clinically stable, high disease burden, limited mobility? Is it an inpatient study that requires hospitalization due to acute nature of the disease, of the symptoms? All of this needs to be taken into consideration, and a risk score, if possible, should be developed to help evaluate all of these different parameters. Here is a sample study schedule of assessment. This particular study adds about 10 visits. However, you can see that some visits have been decentralized, meaning that patients can participate remotely in about 6. So the overall study burden has been reduced for the patients significantly. By using elements such as mobile nursing, mobile phlebotomy, a patient service collection centers such as LabCorp facilities, there are over 1,900 footprints in the US, and these are typically much closer to the patients than an investigator site. The patients can go there to perform some visit assessments, routine blood draws, biometrics. These facilities can be utilized. And also you can see for some assessments as well, the 12-lead ECG, vital signs, all of those can also be done through deployment of connected devices. Sleep assessments as well, activity assessments can also be captured by deploying connected devices. Next slide, please. And this is where I would like to hand off to Jeremy Wyatt, the President and COO of ActiGraph.
Bola, thank you, my friend. Really great presentation, and thanks everybody for joining. And yeah, I'm just reflecting as I'm watching the webinar about the complexities involved in trying to properly prepare for a decentralized trial. And if I put myself in the attendee's shoes here, I'm thinking, man, there's a lot to this. And I wish I could say something to just say, hey, it's really easy, but there's just a lot of considerations. And so in my brief section here, I think what I would like to do is just encourage everybody. And the overall theme here is success comes in proper planning, I think. And this is not a marketing pitch from ActiGraph. We're very honored to be on the webinar today with Christian and Bola from these two reputable companies. And I just want to encourage everyone just to say, you should lean on the people who have some experience here to help make this successful for you. And so here at ActiGraph, what I just want to share with you is what we've observed around that success factor, what has made these trials successful, whether they're decentralized or not. And from our standpoint, we're pretty well known for actigraphy and wearable data measurement. And so whether it's a decentralized trial or a traditional trial, they've been sort of handled the same. So I kind of subtitled the keys to successful wearable data capture here. I had to have a slide, but let me just walk through these and hopefully it'll be helpful. If you go to the next slide, Nick. I thought I would start here just with this quote, and this was a press release recently that just pointed to a sponsor who was able to successfully move into a phase 3 with an MBPA measure, which is a physical activity measure from an actigraphy product. And why did I start here? Well, I started here because we get caught up in the operations a lot, but I think what's critical is for us just to really remember that we have to begin with the end in mind. We get very caught up in the operations of, man, let me go get a Fitbit and put it on my participant. It's going to make their life easier. They're going to be more engaged. All those things are good things, but I don't want us to lose sight of what we're trying to do. In this particular example, this sponsor was very successful in essentially replacing a traditional measurement with an objective measure. And it was good for everyone involved. It was good for the patients. It sped up the trial. It was able to more definitively prove that this therapy was a better path for patients than in the past. And that's what it's all about, guys. It's really about, can I help the patient get what they need quicker? Can I help the sponsor get to a place where they're better servicing the people who can benefit from what we're doing here? So beginning with the end in mind is critical. And Nick, if you go to the next slide, I'll just talk about how we have seen those things come across and where we've seen success. And again, there's a lot of parts that are involved here, guys. And I don't want to try to smooth over and say this is easy. I'm just pointing out the things that we've seen contribute to success. You'll hear me say ecosystem a couple of times today, and really what I'm saying there is it's a holistic approach. And so what we've observed is that if we bring a sensor into the study, we see that if these things are in place, then a lot of check boxes are done for you. And so they're listed here. This is global regulatory compliance. A lot of times if we're talking decentralized or traditional study, we're talking 5 or 6 countries. We don't want to get bogged down on whether or not it's legal. Robust validated sensor and the B3 readiness, those two are sort of tandem efforts. I mean, we want to make sure that the sensor is appropriately fit for use, fit for purpose for the particular approach that we have with what we're trying to study in the patient. Having a master data plan is crucial. We don't hear a lot of talk about that these days, but I think we're seeing it tick up. And that is, if I've got a plan for my particular drug or therapy, what am I going to do with that data over time? It's not just dead data. This is live data. I can actually reuse that data, and I'll talk briefly about that today. And then a robust integration backbone. So ActiGraph, we're good at what we do, but we're not the best at everything. I mean, snapIoT is amazing at deploying rapidly deploying applications to help get at some specific context measurements. We're just not that good at that. And so we've tried to be intentional about developing an integration backbone that allows us to kind of quickly add in these pieces that you all who are trying to develop this drug are going to need to make it successful fast. Next slide. This is the second time I'll mention ecosystem, but for us, just as a reminder, the context of what I'm getting at here is it's not just those pieces of global regulatory deployment or being ready with a validation plan. It's also reminding us that there's a lot of stakeholders involved here, sponsors, CROs, and the technology vendor. And the goal is to get to a digital clinical endpoint. That doesn't come easily by just grabbing something off the shelf and plugging it into a traditional logistics system or a traditional deployment method that might be established for a traditional trial. There's a lot of pieces to the puzzle of that. And maybe the only marketing thing I'll have here is just to say that on the side where it says Centerpoint, we approach this with a system that helps us ensure that we can deliver on these aspects that you see on the circle around security and privacy and regulatory compliance, and even the things that just aren't, frankly, very fun to talk about, like site and patient training. We need to make sure that we have a consistent message to all the stakeholders. This custom protocol specific configuration, that's a lot of words. I don't think I wrote that. On the bottom right there, what we're talking about there is, hey, have we thought about, when do we want the patient to actually start wearing the wearable, or if it's an off-body sensor, when do we want them to turn it on, and what are the implications around battery life, and do I have some control over that? I mean, if you ask the patient, hey, I want you to put this thing on in 2 weeks, and they're going to lose the thing in 2 weeks. And so you want to make sure that you've got the ability to enable and disable things on the technology, and that it's designed for that. API data access, I talked about that. How do you get data in and out of the system? Logistics, I don't want to overlook logistics. It's not something that's very interesting to talk about, but if I've got a lot of success at one site in getting people onboarded, or even a decentralized site, I've got more activity in one area than another. Boy, it sure is nice to be able to have visibility into that and not just have to ask my tech vendor to constantly send change orders. So these are things that I think just aren't considered all the time. I just want to point them out. Next slide, Nick. Yeah, so proper endpoint planning. Again, this idea of beginning with the end in mind, I think is important for me just to illustrate what I mean by that, more than just giving you guys a quote from a press release. Let's click the next section here. So I think typically when we think of how do we get to an endpoint, whether it's a wearable or an off-body sensor, how do we get there? And I think we are programmed culturally to think about traditional measurements like I'm showing on the screen today. And certainly these are important, but it's really not where you begin. If you can fade in the next section, Nick, where we should begin is around meaningful activities for patients. And it's really that simple, right? I mean, let's think about asking the question, what is something that's going to be a meaningful change in your life? If it's someone that wants to spend more time with their grandchildren or gardening, and that's the beginning point, because we really want to deeply understand how do we effectively measure that, and how do we get at that. Fade in the next section, and to do that here, I just want to point out there's a few steps, right? There's some of the obvious things. I'll start in the top right quadrant, which is kind of why we're here, this context gathering concept. Hey, look, the integration with snapIoT is allowing us in a specific study that we're working on to get some highly specific context. If someone's waking up at night, the technology can detect that, but it can't detect why they woke up, right? I don't know if they had to go to the restroom, or if they just had a headache, or is there some side effect of the drug. So the context is important. And I'm going to touch really quickly on the remaining three, and that's verification, clinical validation, and analytical validation. I don't want to go into these too much, but it's important that we consider verification. This is your garbage in, garbage out, right? I mean, if I've got a device or a sensor or anything that I'm using, and I'm really trying to ensure that it does what it says it does, have I thought through that? I mean, if we're not properly capturing acceleration, then I can't go to the next step, which, by the way, is analytical validation. And that's the idea that I've got some sort of gold standard comparison for that particular thing I'm trying to measure. If it's sleep, for instance, have I thought how well this particular device or sensor can act as a surrogate or a measure for that gold standard? And that's hard for highly variable measurements, right? I mean, if we're talking about steps, yeah, does it measure steps? Sure. But does it measure steps for my population? That's where the clinical validation piece comes in. And that's where we look at, really, is it fit for purpose? If I'm measuring steps, for example, well, that's great. But measuring steps for someone who's 7 years old versus someone who's 70 is a much different approach, and it requires a different algorithm altogether. And so it's not a black box. It's not an off-the-shelf solution to get to the left side, which is the how do I really have a lot of robust sense around whether or not I'm actually effectively measuring what I'm trying to here. Next slide, Nick. Yeah, I'm not going to spend much time here. You've heard this 4 times today, guys. This is the point is, and you're hearing it from me independently. We put these slides together a little bit independently. We see success when we have cross-functional team planning and when we see that done ahead of the protocol. And you see the teams here. I don't have to read. Everybody can read. These teams, if they're on the phone with me before we have a protocol and we're having discussions around the strategy, I'm excited because I know that we're going to get a lot of return on investment for the data. And I've got a slide coming up in a second that talks about how we get more return on investment for the data. But we've got to involve these teams. I mean, we tend to leave out the IT team and say they'll figure it out after the fact. But the truth is, when we're dealing with data like this, we have to get ahead of that and not make assumptions. If we make assumptions, we end up in a mess because this is not telemetry data. This is not standard data that I plug into an ePro, or I'm sorry, to an eCOA solution, just like I do an ePro measure. It's different, right? We work with the metadata folks, great team, but the challenge is getting that data in doesn't work like traditional data does. And so, and same thing with the work we're doing with Snap here. So we've got to make sure that we're thinking and planning ahead, and then fade in that last section there, Nick. Just to comment on this, identify limitations, capabilities, and gaps early. That's kind of goes without saying. But that last point, develop a data asset plan. Again, that's the second time I've mentioned it here. We don't see a lot of groups that are thinking ahead about the long-term plan with the data as it relates to the therapy or the compound they're developing. And that should happen. And in the next slide, if you can go to that, kind of explains why. Here's just a quick example, and I'm done. If, for example, with ActiGraph, if we're going to collect data and spend the time and invest in the infrastructure and get the people involved and get the teams involved, then let's not just collect an endpoint that we like steps. Let's think back a little bit and say, look, can I get the high resolution, like completely clean data off the sensor, and then allow that function or that interpretation to sort of be something I can do dynamically? And so fade that first section. And this is a good example. Let's just say we're looking at K-cows. Well, today I might be interested in measuring calories on a specific population, and maybe my clinical validation said, hey, this is the best way to do that, or maybe we work with a university preclinical to get that idea built into what we're going to measure. But look, a year later, go ahead and fade in here, we may have several strategies around how we look at that data. I don't have to go back and recollect the data if I've thought ahead with my data strategy and I've collected it in such a way that allows me to reuse that data. So any of these 1 or 2 or 4 years later, we've got the opportunity not only to apply a method or an algorithm to that data for a different therapeutic area. I've got an ability to do it with different endpoints, and I don't have to recollect data from a placebo group. And there's a lot of wins here, and I see we do see a lot of movement in this direction. It's pretty rare these days to see groups thinking about this, but we really believe that that's kind of where this is heading. So I feel like I was a little bit all over the map, but my point here is that there's a lot of different strategies that we need to consider as we move into this new realm, whether it's decentralized or traditional trial method. And so we go to the next slide, and I'm going to hand it back over to Christian. He's going to do a demo of some of the integration that we've done with snapIoT, but certainly appreciate your attention for a few minutes there. Christian.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy, and thanks, Bola. And on your example, I think that was very valuable about the endpoints and what also Bola highlighted, the patient centricity and thinking about what's really our goal here. How do we make the lives of our patients better? And as you said, you might be able to measure that somebody didn't walk as much today or didn't sleep as much today or things like that, that there's a change in a pattern or a change in a typical situation, and then but without, as you said, without the context, it's not necessarily worth much. And that's, I think, where the integration comes in, and where we all with our different specialties and our different capabilities can bring value together, because then we can with potentially with an app or so, we can then ask and propose that question and say, hey, and drive that down and dive into that and see, why did you not sleep well that way? We just ask the question, and depending on those answers, you know, we go and maybe learn a little bit more. So thank you for that.
Absolutely, Christian. And just to comment, I mean, interrupt, but yeah, man, it's an iterative process, is what you're saying. And you know, having worked with you all, we've learned a lot about that. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, and I think I've heard this. You know, the industry is aware of it, right? So I mean, we've heard this over webinars and conferences over the. I think I've heard it in the last year several times, but you know, it's still something that we all work as a collective industry towards that goal, to make this all you know, very, very much usable and patient centric. So with that said, and I mentioned earlier, we're having a little demo here for you, and I think that will explain a little bit of what also Jeremy just said, and how this can work. You know, once we integrate that data, then we'll have the means to identify those points and to raise those alerts and things like that. So as I said, it's a recording here for today, and you know, Nick, start playing the recording, and then we'll continue here in about 8 minutes.
Today, I'll be showing you a few examples of different integrations that we've accomplished between smart devices and our Snap Clinical platform. So the two integrations that I'll be mainly talking about is the integration with ActiGraph, and I'll be showing different measurements that we've collected using the Insight Watch. And then I'll also be showing an integration that we did with CardioCom, and showing the heart check CardiBeat reading that we did as well. So what you're seeing in front of you is the Snap Clinical platform. At the top right, you'll notice I am logged in as an investigator. And through this account, we only have access to a few subset of features the way an investigator would in an actual clinical trial. And on the left-hand side here, you'll notice the patients list. So I'm going to jump into the patients. So here you'll see a list of all of the patients that we've collected here for our demonstration trial. And for each of these patients, we have different measurements that are shown for, of course, those specific patients. And what I'll be showing is one of these patients that has information from both of those integrations that we did. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Johnny Barron here, and we'll go ahead and jump into their profile. So in their profile, we'll be seeing different information about Johnny. So here on the profile screen, you'll see some information, including PII. And just as a note, this investigator role that we've created that you're seeing here does have access to PII, which is why you're seeing this. If this role did not have access to PII, if we were to turn that off, then of course this data would be masked. So as part of the data that we've collected, you'll see this measurements tab. In the measurements tab is where we can go ahead and see the information that's been collected for Johnny. So I'm going to go ahead and open up our window. So currently we've got it from 5/13 to 5/20. So this is the last week. And I'm going to go ahead and open this up to about April. And what you'll see now is the UI has changed, and it is no longer showing that no measurements are available. And if we see, there's two different tabs here. So we've got one on the left, which is graph, and one on the right, which is calendar. So these are two different views that you can see the data that you've collected for this particular patient. And so currently we are in the graph view, and this is the measurements graph at the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and click select measurements. And these are the different types of measurements that we've collected for ActiGraph for the Insight Watch. The integration that we did, we decided to select a few different examples and show that we could collect this data. Of course, the Insight Watch collects a lot more than just these 4 data points. And if we wanted to extend that, it's as easy as just including those integration pieces as well. So the approach that we took for the integration of the Insight Watch is the Insight Watch collects all of the data using the ActiGraph app, and that data then gets sent to ActiGraph, and the moment that ActiGraph receives that data then gets pushed to Snap Clinical. Snap Clinical stores all of this data with all of the different points around that data, so not just how many calories, for example, but also the date, the timestamp, etc. and we store that in our backend. And the idea is, one, we're collecting all of it in one central source, and two, it's kept secure in case it needs to be accessed at a later time. Additionally, this data can then be fed to any clinicians, investigators, PI, etc. And everybody would be able to see that data as long as they have the permissions here on our Snap Clinical portal. So I'm going to go ahead and select one of these different data points. So I'll go ahead and click calories, for example, and you'll see a graph populate here with some of the data points that we collected in this demonstration. So you'll see the different time slots here at the very bottom. So these are the different dates where the data was collected. And the information that you're seeing is the aggregate data over the course of time. So you'll see here on April 12th, we collected about 400 or so calories. And that was, of course, stored in our back end. If we wanted to change this data, maybe instead of calories, we can see steps. We can start to see, again, this graph change over the course of time with the different data points slightly different. If instead of a graph, you wanted to see the data just spread out as data points, we can jump over to our calendar view. And here you'll see the calendar date of when the data was collected, and you'll see the value for the data that was collected. For this particular integration, we do a bulk data transfer for all of the patients once a day, and that happens at midnight, which is why you're seeing this time of 00. So we are doing just daily collection. If we jump back into graph, we can also start to correlate data to each other. So if we select two different data points, so for example, maybe steps and calories, we can start to see some variances over the course of time and how one might be related to another. So we can do that both here on the graph, or as well, we can export this data as CSV and view that data on different other services that you may have. So for the second type of integration that we did, that was done with the CardioCom HeartCheck CardiBeat. And for that device, we weren't actually collecting specific data points. That was actually an EKG reading. So that was done at the home with one lead sensor. It's actually held between your hands, and it records a reading of about 30 seconds. And for that device, it's done using the CardioCom app. That app records the data, creates a PDF, and it's saved to their back end. And the moment that happens, our platform is then able to go to their back end, retrieve the data, and store it in our back end. And that does, as I mentioned earlier, create a PDF. So we can view that PDF here under the Documents tab. If we jump to our documents, you'll see some of those readings here on the left-hand side. And if I go ahead and click one of them, you'll see the actual PDF here upload. And the reason, of course, for this PDF is this is a 30-second reading, so it's a wave that's recorded over that time. So you'll see the entirety of that report here on the right-hand side. If there was a second set of eyes that has to go through this prior to it coming to us, so for example, if you wanted to see this graph interpreted by a doctor, that can be done prior to us retrieving it, and you'd see all of that information here included in the report that comes from CardioCom. So with both of these integrations that I've talked about, we've essentially gone to their backend, retrieved the data, stored it in our backend, and then we can provide it at any time. What's great about that retrieval is it is available for anybody who has that permission. And additionally, if you do decide to collect any types of questionnaires, you can always correlate data between the two. So for example, if we jump into measurements and we know that they have filled out a questionnaire for one specific day, let's just say, again, let's open up this window. Let's say that they filled out the questionnaire for April 12th. We can start to correlate data and start to see information about the April 12th. And we can even go down to the minute as well. So if you wanted to see maybe the steps that they've taken from just an hour window of when they took that questionnaire, that can also be done here by using our filters. And the idea is we're providing as much information at the point of view of the doctor or the clinician to try to get more information for them. And additionally, of course, for the clinician or for the clinical trial, we can try to collect as much data as possible so that it can be analyzed at a further time. For any of these different integrations, all of this information is, of course, exportable. So for these measurements, we can export into CSV. Or if you are using a third-party systems to do any type of analytics, we can always integrate into those third-party tools and push that data out at any time.
Okay, so that's a thank you to our lead engineering manager, Oscar Rangel, for recording that demo for us. And you know, the example that he gave there on, you know, correlating that data or driving down the data down to the minute, you know, if you can think of, you know, when we do want to decentralize operations, and we talked about schedule of events and what assessments to do, you know, if we think about things like a 6-minute walk test, for example, right? That 6-minute walk test is typically done on site with staff observing that. And you know, I'm not want to go to the point of you know, revalidating that walk test, but just in theory, if you think about it, you could derive that 6-minute walk test from that data point that you have already by them just wearing that device. You could monitor down to the minute and have those questions answered at the same time, and then correlate that data, and don't have to do an extra assessment that is time consuming, burdensome in a way, and of course requires patients to be in the same location with the physician. So with that said, you know, we'll close the informational part of the webinar and go into Q&A. And we have received a couple of questions, and I'll start with Bola, actually. So one of the questions we received is what percentage of trials are being launched in a fully virtual capacity versus having hybrid models? And Bola, that question was for you.
Yes. Hi, Christian.
Hi. So again, the question was, what percentage of trials are being launched in a fully virtual capacity versus having hybrid models?
Yes, it's a good question, and right now I can't say I can speak to exact percentages, but what I am able to share is that the vast majority of studies that are being conducted right now are being conducted using the hybrid approach, where some study activities are conducted on site, and some are still conducted remotely from the patient's home. But increasingly, we're seeing an adoption where studies are being conducted fully using a fully decentralized approach. Those are typically for your phase 4 post-marketing observational studies, but increasingly the phase 2 and phase 3 studies for the suitable study designs are taking that into consideration. That's how I will respond to that question. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, yes, yeah, thank you, Bola. And I'll expand that actually onto the question about, you know, how do we define actually decentralized trial? And I think that's also a bit of a fluid type of definition, right? It depends a bit on where you are. And as Bola said, in a phase 3 a trial, that you just can't do everything remotely, right? In certain uses. And so we would consider something a decentralized trial in that phase, where in another phase, because we do things a lot less invasive, that that would then be considered a hybrid trial. So those different definitions are fluid in a sense, a little bit on, I think, and that's my personal opinion there anyways, that it's not quite that, there is no clear-cut definition of what is that decentralized trial, right? We've all done ePro and eCo for years, and that's sort of a decentralized manner of data collection, or even the good old paper diary back in the day, right? Is a form of decentralization, but you know, that doesn't make a decentralized trial just putting out an eCOA. You need to make sure that you decentralize or quote virtualize other study procedures to limit the need for patients to go into the office and be physically present somewhere. So with that, I'll have a question here for Jeremy, and that is, how does ActiGraph ensure that wearables are worn correctly? You know, I guess it comes down to data quality in a sense, and we talked about wear periods, wear times. So Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. That's a good question. Thinking through that, I think that it's kind of a multi-dimensional answer. There's no one, well, we do this, right? I mean, there's sort of the physical aspect of it. A lot of times, depending on the strategy of the trial, you know, we'll deploy the wearable with a specific type of band or clip that's going to be used. It sort of limits the way that it's supposed to be worn. In some cases, interestingly enough, this sounds super simple, but if we're studying the pediatric group, for example, we'll put Mickey Mouse watch bands on the watch, and they get encouraged to wear them. They like it. They want to be engaged. In other cases, we sort of make it semi-permanent. We can use actual hospital band that's kind of, you can cut it off, but you know it's sort of there permanently. And then of course the other side of that is data screening. We do have a data screening team that is able to look at the data and make determinations around where we have things that are just anomalies or outliers in the data that we can say is an exclusionary process. They threw this thing in the dryer, right? So we're able to kind of do that. And then there's the stuff that you sort of take for granted that we mentioned a few times, and that's just planning, proper planning and training. I don't think anybody maliciously says we're going to wear this in the wrong place or put this in the wrong way. I think what we see is if we're pretty intentional up front in delivering the message to the teams that are putting these watches or devices on people, if we're consistent with that message early and often, saying sometimes 4 or 5 times, not just in a PowerPoint, right, but really getting at demonstration and discussion, we see more engagement that way. So hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. We have just 2 minutes left, so I'll take one more question here. That is, how much extra time should be factored in for launch of a wearable, and if it needs to be integrated with our platform? So that is a good question as well, and it varies a bit. And you know, it's what I said earlier. You want to be involved as early as possible. You want to be part of the process. The actual integration, the executable part of it to make it happen on a technical level, that can be done very quickly. We've done an integration in about a week on the fast side, and we've also done integrations that took about 4 weeks or 5 weeks, and that's variable, of course, based on you know, what the capabilities of the other party is. I can't only speak for myself, right? But you know, not every company or not every technology that we're asked to integrate with is on the same capability, on the same technical level. And some companies will have very well-defined APIs or very well-defined documentation for that. And then it's literally, you know, as we say here, in a snap, we can do this in a week, as we have done. But then in other cases, it's a little bit more of a manual process, and you know, you have to have lots of meetings and talk through things because the documentation might not be there, and things are just done on a more improvised or an ad hoc manner. So from our perspective, you don't need to plan in any extra time because we do it on the side of the other implementation development. Like, you know, if you have an eco or something like that, we do it all within the same time frame from our end. You know, it probably comes down to how it fits into the process that we talked about, as process is important. So, and with that, we're out of time. Thank you all for staying with us today. Here's the email address to email us, and if you want a copy of the slides. We have received some other questions and comments, and we will answer those offline. Again, thank you for spending your time with us here today, and stay safe and have a good rest of your day.